Welcome to Blaze News, the mandate day 2. Last night, Donald Trump sat down with Sean Hannity in the Oval Office for his first one-on-one interview since his inauguration. The conversation spanned from Joe Biden's presidential pardons of his family members to security concerns over TikTok. But one of the highlights was when Trump pointed out the 4 years of hell he went through and floated an investigation into the people who put him through it.
I went through 4 years of hell by this scum that we had to deal with. I went through 4 years of hell. I spent millions of dollars in legal fees, and I won, but I did it the hard way. It's really hard to say that they shouldn't have to go through it also. It is very hard to say that.
And Hannity questioned Trump on his decision to pardon January 6 prisoners. Take a look.
Number one, they were in there for 3.5 years, a long time. Right. And in many solitary confinement, treated like nobody's ever been treated so badly.
Well, he's been speaking also on a global stage. He spoke virtually to the global elites at the World Economic Forum in Davos and announced that America will no longer police disinformation among its own citizens.
On day one, I signed an executive order to stop all government censorship. No longer will our government label the speech of our own citizens as misinformation or disinformation, which are the favorite words of censors and those who wish to stop the free exchange of ideas and, frankly, progress.
You know that everybody in Davos is going to be so upset because misinformation and disinformation was their top priority last year. But Donald Trump also called out the Bank of America CEO for debanking conservatives.
I hope you start opening your bank to conservatives, because many conservatives complain that the banks are not allowing them to do business within the bank, and that included a place called Bank of America. They don't take conservative business. And I don't know if the regulators mandated that because of Biden or what, but you and Jamie and everybody, I hope you're going to open your banks to conservatives, because what you're doing is wrong.
And in a move that was promised, but I still didn't know if we would ever see this in my lifetime. Watch Trump sign the executive order to declassify the JFK documents and more.
Lastly, sir, we have an executive order ordering the declassification of files relating to the assassinations of President John F. Kennedy, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
That's a big one, huh? A lot of people are waiting for this for years, for decades.
Yeah, people have been waiting for that one for decades. Now let's welcome in Blaze News editor-in-chief Matthew Peterson. Matt, I mean, we look at that one. That one is the big one. I still can't wrap my mind around this. Is this actually going to happen?
Hey, like you said, it's one of these things where you just think there's no way that this will ever happen, because it hasn't happened in all these years. And why hasn't it happened? So therefore, you know, it never will. And even now, part of me is still thinking, you can just sign things like this can it really happen? But of course, as we were saying earlier, the reason that this is going to happen is because RFK Jr. is in this administration. Trump means what he's saying. And, you know, I think we can expect, you know, to really see the goods.
Well, we all know, right? The executive orders can be undone by the next president that gets in there. But what are they going to do if he signs the executive order and it all happens within his 4-year time frame? Oops, there's no going back. You can't put that one back in.
Yes. And look, in the past, Trump did order some things to be, you know, unveiled. And what they do is there's a whole bureaucratic process by which they slow this down. But this is happening on day 3, and Trump is a little savvy, and his administration is savvy to these games. And I think RFK Jr. may, in fact, want to know and has thoughts about that he's shared publicly about what happened to his relatives.
I want to go back to the World Economic Forum stuff, because I know that everybody that is out there in Davos right now has to be, one, very upset that Donald Trump won. You're welcome. But two, they look at what he's saying, and he's not out there just trying to, he's not painting the pale pastels. He's coming with the bold colors, if you will, Ronald Reagan.
He's just coming in and telling them what he thinks, and he's just being Trump, and he doesn't care. And increasingly, I think people are realizing that maybe they shouldn't care so much about this organization and what they do and say. I think that you're going to see a fracturing of kind of the confidence and cohesion of this, global elite that likes to get together and pretend they all control everything. What you see with Trump now is someone who is in his prime, saying what he thinks and letting people know what he thinks they should do and not do.
Well, we see him right now go after, Bank of America CEO and crony capitalism. Are we actually going to see a country where they aren't going to vilify conservatives, right? Is it going to be so faux pas that some of these big businesses will just stop doing it because they know they will be on the losing end of a marketing game?
Yeah, I mean, I think he knows what he's doing. He knows exactly what he's doing when he says that in public to shame them, so that it does make it very difficult to maintain these tyrannical policies. And, it really is shameful because it is tyrannical. This is exceedingly dangerous to be debanking people on the basis of their political beliefs. And that's why Trump is telling them all to their faces, you got to knock this off. And, it was very interesting the way he did that in his diplomatic way. You might have done a good job as CEO, but you got to stop this. This is ridiculous. And the shaming aspect of that, when the president of the United States, the leader of the most powerful country in the world at the height of his power, is coming in with a, dare I say it, mandate from the people, looks into the camera and says, you got to stop doing that. That's a powerful, powerful use of the bully pulpit.
Well, if it does come to pass, if we do get the JFK documents declassified, we might have to buy some champagne and have some here on the show because we've been waiting for so long for this one. Even if we know it's not going to say good things in there, guys. We know that's why they've kept it a secret from us for so long. But it will be just an entirely new America once that happens.
Yeah, just to see these orders play out, if they truly play out, and I think they will, there's no question now, we're talking about a different, because think about the structure of this, right? When you think that there's some things everyone should know that your government hides from you. That's Soviet. That shouldn't be America, but here we are. If you can go back really to an America where you feel like, no, we are the people. What are you hiding? We pay your salary anyway. We deserve to know these things.
Well, we are going to continue that line of thinking when we come back because Heritage Foundation President Kevin Roberts will expose the latest dirty tricks to derail Pete Hegseth coming up. How far would a teacher go to save a kid who's lost all hope? From Angel Studios, the team behind Sound of Freedom, comes Brave the Dark. It's a powerful, true story about a troubled teen, Nate Williams. He's struggling to survive in a world that's let him down. He's haunted by a painful past. Nate is spiraling into darkness when his drama teacher, Mr. Dean, steps in and bails him out of jail and takes him under his wing. We all need a Mr. Dean in our life. Now, this story is a reminder that one meaningful connection can change everything. Brave the Dark will leave you inspired and showing you the strength of compassion and the power of never giving up on someone. I can't recommend this enough. Brave the Dark hits theaters now. You can go get your tickets at angel.com/Jill. That's angel.com/Jill. Don't miss it. Since Donald Trump nominated him for defense secretary, Pete Hegseth has faced a slew of allegations from the deep state of sexual assault, alcohol abuse, and public misconduct. Kevin Roberts is the president of Heritage Foundation, and he wrote this on X. Don't be fooled. These last-minute allegations against Pete Hegseth are a deep state playbook we've seen many times. It's always used against nominees who will bring much-needed reform to the swampy business-as-usual D.C. Senate Republicans should file cloture and confirm him, especially considering these allegations have already been disputed. Americans and free people across the world need him in office now. Well, Kevin Roberts joins us right now. So, Kevin, thanks so much for coming on. Now, this is a perfect example of why we wanted to start the mandate, to expose stuff like this. So, how does the deep state try to disrupt these confirmation hearings?
Well, they rarely go through the front door. That is to say, Jill, they rather rarely come right out and say that something is so explicitly wrong with a nominee, or if they try to do that and it doesn't succeed, they don't really double down because they're not transparent. And so what they do is work through interlocutors. They work through Democrats. Unfortunately, they sometimes work through Republicans. And look, it isn't just about nominees to be cabinet secretaries. This is also about members of the deep state. In the last weeks of the Biden-Harris regime, burrowing in from politically appointed positions in the administration into career positions, thereby making it more difficult to get rid of them, which would be very justified. Let me just be really clear that as it relates to soon to be Secretary Hegseth, a vote against Pete Hegseth is a vote for the deep state globalists. It's really that simple. The reason they're opposed to him is because he would bring much needed reform to an agency that is desperate for it.
Kevin, it is a great day to be an American, notwithstanding this nonsense. And a lot of people are paying attention for the first time to things like confirmation hearings. There's more attention now on what is going on in Washington, D.C. than there has been in many years. So it's a good time for you to walk us through what the point of this is supposed to be and why we have confirmation hearings in the first place.
Our founders intended, as you know, Matt, for the advice and consent role of the Senate to be temporary, to be short, to not become the circus that it often is. And of course, I think every single founder, if they were alive today, would be horrified by what they're seeing, where the advice and consent role of the Senate has been taken by the Senate and exploited to be used against the executive branch, as opposed to its original intent, which is to provide some bit of accountability for these appointees. In other words, when the president is appointing well-qualified men and women to these roles, then the assumption is that the president gets his prerogative. And in this case, what's happening is that you see the typical performative theater of the DC deep state, where some of these senators do something that's sort of innocent but time-consuming, and that is ask a really short question in the form of a very long monologue about something that they think will help them back home. But the particularly nefarious part of this new modern version of the advice and consent role of the Senate is that it's used to undermine very well qualified men and women. That's precisely the kind of thing that's getting in the way of needing to do the work of the American people, particularly when you think about the need to have a Secretary of Defense in office right now.
Well, let's use Pete Hegseth still as the example. He advanced through his vote today. He got a 51-49 majority there. Collins and Murkowski were no votes, but Mitch McConnell somehow was a yes vote. So we are going to expect to see Pete Hegseth go up for that ultimate vote sometime before tomorrow night. So just take us through this process and what this is, like just the step-by-step here as people can expect to see this going forward.
I'll give you some inside baseball from the non-DC insider, just a little bit of knowledge I've gained in my few years running Heritage. And that is that today's vote, the 51-49 vote, is a procedural vote. It's the last step, as you said, Jill, to the actual vote that I think is very likely to confirm him. And it's a minor win for Mr. Hegseth. I disagree with Senators Murkowski and Collins about their vote, but I'm very grateful that Senator McConnell on the procedural vote voted for Mr. Hegseth. That's something that the DC chattering class didn't think would happen. And hopefully Mr. McConnell keeps that vote in the same direction on Friday. It's very likely that by 9:15, 9:30 p.m. on Friday, that we're going to have a confirmed Secretary of Defense. And it's very likely that he's going to report to the office right then and there. That's something that none of the DC chattering class is ready for. It's also very likely that the subsequent hearings for the nominees to be deputy secretary and the other Senate confirmed positions need to move expeditiously. I think Majority Leader Thune is ready to do that. Ultimately, this is what I'm driving at. Once Mr. Hegseth is confirmed, then it's Katie bar the door when it comes to reforming the Pentagon, actually in the name of American defense. That's the irony of all of this, is that this performative theater of the deep state is actually making Americans less safe as we wait for the secretary to be confirmed.
One of the things that's striking about this tactic that you're pointing out is that even if you said, well, okay, we're going to play politics, we don't care whether the candidate is qualified or not, we just disagree with them, you could at least come out and say what you disagree with, right? I mean, it strikes me that this is similar to Brett Kavanaugh. We've seen this in the past. Maybe you have some thoughts about Tulsi and what might go on there. But it is not kind of a veil, right? I mean, they're not even talking about the political disagreements in the open.
You know, Matt, you and I are both parents, and I often observe politics through the lens of a dad. And in particular, one of the things my wife and I teach our kids never to do, which is to be passive aggressive because it's just a terrible attribute of someone. Basically, most of DC insiders are passive aggressive. That is to say, they aren't courageous enough to come right out and say what they disagree with regarding a nominee. That would be fair game, right? That's actually part of the advice and consent of the Senate. And what's interesting is that some of the best members of the Senate in our country's history, both Republicans and Democrats, have expressed their disagreement and often still voted for the nominee because they understand the executive deserves his prerogative. But all of that to say, I think that Hegseth gets through. I think that Tulsi Gabbard is going to have an equally difficult path to confirmation. Of course, we at Heritage believe that she ought to be confirmed. The hearing probably already should have happened. I think Mr. Kennedy also has among the more difficult paths. We're paying close attention to Senator Kennedy, or Senator Cassidy, I should say, of Louisiana, who's been a little tepid in his support of Mr. Kennedy. I understand that there are some kind of outdated conservatives in DC who are opposed to Mr. Kennedy, and yet Mr. Kennedy, I think, has expressed that he's going to hire people in his Department of Health and Human Services who will be very pro-life, and also it's an extraordinarily conservative position to be saying we're going to get big pharma money out of DC. But you see, the problem in DC as it relates to Mr. Kennedy is that so many organizations, including some quote unquote conservative ones, are funded by big pharma. And so in addition to getting these great men and women confirmed, we also need to understand that so doing would begin to break the backs of K Street. And that's just something that not a lot of people in DC are willing to see.
Amazing. And yet it seems to be happening, and you seem to be optimistic. What would you say about the larger problem here in terms of confirmation and, this sort of subterfuge on the part of the deep state? How do we change this so that we don't have these ridiculous gotcha moments in confirmations hearings in the future? What needs to change?
Well, it starts with leadership, and you're seeing it obviously at the executive level with President Trump and his wonderful vice president. You're also seeing great leadership by Majority Leader Thune, and very respectfully towards him. I'm slightly surprised by that, not because I thought he was incapable of it, but I thought ideologically he might be just a little out of step with this new Trumpian conservatism, and he deserves 100% A+ thus far in his management of it. And all of that to say, if Senator Thune is able to understand the moment, which is that we have to return to constitutional order, which is that the executive gets his prerogative, then I think you're going to see other potential leaders step up, whether they be in the executive branch or the legislative branch. But ultimately, what is the most important factor in this, Matt, is that the American people continue to pay attention. It's wonderful that with your show and with the great work of the Blaze generally, you're keeping pedal to the metal. Now is not the time to be asleep. Now is not the time to not be worried about politics and policy. The popular will that's put a wind in the sails of Trump and Vance and John Thune and Mike Johnson on the House side can be sustained if we, the people, continue to be involved. Senators will tell you that they don't really listen to pressure from the outside. But I can tell you, often organizing that pressure from the outside, that it works.
Well, Kevin, I think that you echoed just exactly what Matthew and I have been talking about since we were in D.C. for the inauguration, and just a sense of renewed optimism. My last question for you before we let you go here is, what are you the most optimistic about, right? This is a brand new time for our country, it feels like, where we actually have an opportunity to go through and make some real substantive changes. So what is at the top of your list that you want to see get done?
Well, I'm excited about almost every cabinet appointee, and I could give you specifics from each of those agencies. You know, Jill, I'm an educator, so I'm real interested in seeing the education department dismantled. The appointee I'm most interested in terms of what he's going to do is Russ Vought at the Office of Management and Budget. He's got what seems to the average person to be a boring job, and Russ is perfectly fine to work behind the scenes, but he is vital to this entire effort, whether it's in education or foreign policy or defense or agriculture, because the director of the Office of Management and Budget has the potential, and Russ certainly has the ability to do this, to change the trajectory of the growth of the federal government and the expense of our federal budget. If he succeeds in doing that, and I think that he will, then what we're going to see is not just the right sizing of government, but we're going to see in the long term the revitalization of the American civilization in architecture, in art, in education, in everything. We ought to be thinking with that kind of aspirational vision when we're connecting what's happening in the short terms with confirmation hearings with the long term. I couldn't be more excited about the potential, provided that the American people continue to be tuned in.
Well, Kevin, we've talked about Russ Vogt as well here. If you just tell people that he is now part of the shiny Doge stuff, maybe people will be like, oh, that's way cooler than what I initially thought it would be. Kevin, thanks so much for joining us.
Y'all are the best. Thanks for having me.
Matthew, when you look at all these confirmation hearings that are going on, I mean, some of them are going through very easily. Some of them, Schumer came out and said that Democrats will slow down all the Trump nominees who lack the unanimous bipartisan support. So basically, if they have any chance on this, they're going to take that gridlock in D.C. and they're going to slow it down. But that's kind of business as usual.
Yeah, it doesn't feel like so far that they're really going to be able to pull much off. I mean, whether it's because of the the use of Gates as sort of an Overton window shifter or not, you heard Kevin. He knows what he's talking about. He's there. He's optimistic about some of the more controversial of these picks. So you can sense the momentum and you can sense the reluctance to really go full Kavanaugh. The energy just isn't there. And the really important thing about what Kevin was saying is the point of Blaze News, the mandate, which is that people have to stay on it. We have to shine a spotlight on what's going on, and then this momentum can continue forward.
You mentioned Kavanaugh there again, so let's go there because they are trying to do something very similar with Pete Hegseth, right? It was an NBC News story that came out, and they were using a third-party source saying that Hegseth abused his second wife. Well, the second wife came out and said, nope, nothing to see here. Yeah. They said that before and still ran the story, right? These are the things that they are used to being able to get away with on the legacy media side of things. And now, something has changed. Wait, X is owned by Elon. People can actually go out there and get the truth. There are shows like this out there now. It won't just be as easy as it once was for them to just put these stories out and say, that's it, nothing else to see here. Exactly.
Every day that goes by now, you can see that power decreasing. I mean, 10 years ago, something like this would have been a bombshell. Now it's a yawn, it's a yawn.
They had the ability to ruin people's lives, though.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, and they have, and they will continue to try to. But what you're seeing is a rebuke of all of that by the entirety, the majority of the American people. And you can just see people stand up and go, no, we're not doing this anymore. And you can see that, they keep on throwing the stones, but they're not breaking the window.
Just to go back to our first segment, we have to get RFK Jr. in there because we need the JFK documents to be released. We need that on the show. Don't go anywhere, though. Chris Bedford will tell the tale of how the DOJ became the Department of Injustice. Straight ahead. Today in the spotlight is the Department of Justice. The DOJ was once seen as the gold standard of American law and order, the agency that people trusted to be fair and impartial, but that's just not the case anymore. Instead of respect, the DOJ is now met with fear and frustration and distrust. It's been weaponized not to serve justice, but to serve political agendas. Here to lay out the issue with us is Chris Bedford. He's our Blaze senior politics editor. So Chris, when it comes to deep state government corruption, we almost have to start with the DOJ, right? It wasn't always this way. So can you first at least take us back to a simpler time when the DOJ was a more honest department?
Gosh, it's hard. It's hard to think of a time in history where DOJ wasn't political in some way, this way or that. If you read Richard Nixon's first book, Five Crises, the first one, which is the most interesting, is his story of how he uncovered Whittaker Chambers and brought him in to testify in the Eldred Hiss trial about communists in the Department of State, high-ranking Soviet spies in the U.S. government. And he worked really hard to make sure that the FBI would not get a hold of that witness before he did, because he knew the FBI would simply bury it for the president. When a friend later on asked J. Edgar Hoover, the founder of the FBI, why did you spy on Barry Goldwater's campaign? He responded, well, when the president tells you to do something, you do it. There was a time after the Church Committee where they broke down U.S. intelligence, and the FBI has always been the worst offender of these, where they broke down U.S. intelligence and said, we expect you to be a law enforcement agency. This is the kind of DOJ that we grew up with. Silence of the Lambs, like they're hunting serial killers and rapists, and they're freeing children. They're not involved with political domestic spying operations. Even that DOJ has got some kind of wild overreaches, whether it's Ruby Ridge or Waco, Texas. But what we see now, where the American people have lost trust, where these aren't just the concerns of the political and people who are watching closely, where the American people have lost trust, I think began in 9/11, where the church committee's rulings of the lack of spying were really pushed away. The DOJ changed dramatically to have to, and its intelligence arms, to be something that made enforcement and entrapment really important parts of its tactics in the United States. And what started with Islamic terror and was questioned only by a couple of libertarians and liberals turned out to actually expand pretty dramatically to Catholic churches. And these last couple of years, we've seen the steepest decline. I mean, when Donald Trump was elected president and the head of the FBI comes and briefs U.S. senators and U.S. people and says, we think there's a serious problem with Russian collusion, the idea is to believe it. Jeff Sessions believed it. Marco Rubio, whoever else, believed it. They said, wow, this must be really serious. The American people did too. But by the time, fast forward 4 years, they're raiding Mar-a-Lago. You have people like Marco Rubio, now Secretary of State, immediately recording cell phone videos on their back porch saying, this is wrong, this is overreach, because that credit that they had built up over those decades, like you talked about, was spent so dramatically. And I think they believe they are part of the resistance. I think they actually liked the smell of their own gas. And they thought that they were essential to taking down this evil threat. And they had to save liberal global order from evil orange man. And because of that, just like the press and just like corporate America, which is starting to correct now, they lost all credibility.
Chris, I think that's such an important point to paint in the broad picture that nothing is new under the sun, and there is no such thing as a perfect era where there was no weaponization of government and everything was hunky-dory. Nonetheless, let me paint a picture of better times, and it might be idealized. I think it is somewhat to try to get more precisely at where and how things went wrong. So, I mean, first off, it's called the Department of Justice. At the heart of the American system is the idea of the rule of law, not of arbitrary individuals. And when you have the highest government, the federal government, has a system of laws, and those who prosecute the laws, and those who represent the government, the Supreme Court, this is all within the Department of Justice's pure purview. And, as a young, idealistic man who was brought as a child to Northern Virginia, whose father, my father, was working at the Justice Department under Ed Meese, a sort of legendary figure. I remember this as part of the soul of my American experience, is shaking his hand as he was walking down the halls, in those halls of justice, right? What it's literally called, and thinking, this guy is in charge of the entire thing, right? He's very kind to me. I was probably like 10 years old, and hi, and thinking, wow, that's amazing. And then coming there years later, and having studied some of this stuff and knowing people who worked there, seeing the actual tablets of law, Moses's tablets of law, all of these figures from throughout history in the Roman style, right? I mean, so it just strikes me like the very essence of American government is sort of tied in some way to the Department of Justice, a lofty title. And even though there were these, scandals and Hoover and all kinds of, Ruby Ridge and all these sorts of things, there was still like some part of you that, at least for me, that tied America's essential goodness to the Department of Justice, because at the very end of the day, there were bureaucrats who were good, right? There were bureaucrats who they might have been Republican or Democrat. There might have been some shenanigans, but they really did see their job as tied to the office, tied to the rule of law, tied to the Department of Justice. That was what was in my naive head, but I think it represents a lot of heads in America, on the right anyway, until we reached 2016. And I remember being on a plane, leaving Washington, D.C., after realizing full well, oh no, we were spying on ourselves. The Department of Justice is thoroughly corrupt. This is very clearly, a lot of this is coming from there. And then a lot of the things you just talked about are revealed. The text messages, we're going to get rid of Trump. Don't worry, it's up to us to stop him and all this. if we zoom in on that change, it feels, I mean, is it naive to think like something essential changed? Was it always this way? And you mentioned 9/11. That certainly was part of it. Do you think there's something else that went on in the last 10 years?
Yeah, I think you could probably trace it back to the Ivy League universities. If you look at the top of the Department of Justice, they all fit the pedigree. They're all Harvard, Princeton, Yale men, and that was always like that. I think it was originally the CIA, they said, was a Yale operation, essentially. That's how Bill Buckley got tied up into it and the rest of them. But when the Ivy Leagues really laid the groundwork for a lot of the radicalism that we see now, where the ideas of just clear, blind justice are no longer as important as the arc of history that bends toward whatever, and getting across these different ideas. The department, still in field offices across the country, you will find good, solid federal justice agents, whether they're from the FBI or wherever, the U.S. Marshals, wherever. You'll find people who are solid. In Washington, D.C., though, the people who were attracted to that power, the people who watched West Wing and thought, that looks like a cool show, I would like to be a part of that moral training, who came here, they came from a different thing. You also see a breakdown in standards that really started to happen. I mean, look, remember when the FBI was kneeling in the streets before Black Lives Matter activists to apologize for their whiteness while these guys rioted? If you look at the pictures of that, that's not field agents. That's overweight, short-haired, college-educated women. I mean, it's not an impressive picture of law enforcement. They happen to be wearing a badge and body armor, but they're your classic substitute teacher liberal. That's who they are, and that's kind of the culture that built up in Washington, D.C. James Comey bought into it completely, and I think that rot really maybe started to spread under Barack Obama, where you started to get this cultural change in the DOJ and really prepare it for that complete and total rejection of Donald Trump. Because one thing about those Ivy Leagues is, while they may have these lofty ideas that they think that they're trying to defend, they have a real scorn for a huge swath of the country that they consider backwards, they consider, deplorables. And that really started to show when they pushed back against Donald Trump.
Well, the culture in D.C., Chris, is a two-tiered justice system, right? You have the political elites that have one system of justice, and then the average Americans, right? But what does it look like when justice isn't blind? How do we function as a country when this is one of the things that was supposed to just be inherent, and it's now just completely gone off the rails?
I know. Well, political control of the DOJ was pretty standard until the reaction against Richard Nixon. And I think we started to see political control of the DOJ and meddling of the DOJ really come back under Barack Obama. And you see it in different prosecutions. I mean, as Chip Roy was pointing out, and the Daily Caller reported out, over 90% of FACE Act violations over the last 30 years have been against pro-lifers, not against the pro-abortion activists and vandals. That's kind of a crazy statistic. It shows that there's really a political consensus that just kind of spreads. But it's not always coming. It's just, we talked about this earlier this week. It's not like Lois Lerner picked up the phone and Barack Obama said, execute Order 66, stop giving nonprofit status to conservative organizations. It was just cultural. It was tolerated. It was understood. You're the good guys. You see these crazy things like, you're on the wrong side of history. But that is a really insidious statement. It basically says, we're the good guys, you're the Nazis. We're the good guys, you're the Ku Klux Klan. We're the good guys, you're the Christians. And that kind of culture just spreads and gives a moral righteousness to this sort of crackdown. And what you need to do to fix it, I think, is to bring back standards, bring back checks, bring back balances. I mean, a huge thing. And Matt Peterson used to teach a course on, or oversee a course on this at Claremont. A huge thing is we need to return to congressional oversight, and not just partisan. Democrats are mad and Republicans do something. Republicans are mad when Democrats do something. Congress itself, as opposed to simply partisan, ought to be united in its jealousy of its oversight powers against the executive. Ought to be willing to push back against the executive, no matter who's in charge there, and actually try to hold things to account and make sure that different departments, including justice, aren't going too far away from where they're supposed to be, as has happened.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things there that would just say quickly, without teaching a course, that is important is for Congress to do that is, and people in the audience need to understand this because it's counterintuitive. You think, well, I want term limits, right? I want small staffs, and that's a good thing, and it's not a good thing because the size of government and the power of the bureaucracy has grown while congressional staffing and employment of talented people has gone down quite a bit.
Triple the budget.
So you need Congress, people in Congress who have those smart committee members and lawyers who can help hold the bureaucracy in account instead of being creatures of the administrative state. But let's talk about Bondi a little bit more. You say checks and balances, because I mean what you're suggesting is, look, she needs to come in and there needs to be a complete culture change. So standards, and I think you're talking more of a culture change rather than anything legally or structurally, right? That she needs to come in and say, no, this is our mission. This is what we do and how we do it. And then you'd have to implement, I guess, that across a wide variety of leaders throughout the DOJ, get rid of a bunch of people. And basically, it would be like a turnover in business, right? Where you're going to say, we're getting rid of the old regime.
She should do that. I think she should smash the left-wing NGO and terrorist supporting apparatus that's grown up around the country, supported by taxpayers and the Ford Foundation. I think she should take I hate it when Republicans come in and say, oh, this has been used as a weapon against us forever and ever. We're just going to put it and leave it on the table, and then you can come back in 4 to 8 or 12 years, pick it up and blow my head off. I think she should go after the Ford Foundation and say, why are you backing violent insurrections in different cities across the country? Why are you supporting terrorist-affiliated groups? Why are you supporting different organizations that neuter children? She should go after this massive left-wing money operation that's hijacked dead people's fortunes to use it against us. She should look at Soros and say, you're funding this person who frees these rapists. You're doing this. They should look at Hans Weiss and say, wow, it looks like there's a lot of evidence that you, at least from the woman on the record, that you beat, tortured, and raped her. Maybe we should look at you, mega donor Hans Weiss. I think that the Department of Justice, time for let's just go back to the 90s where there's occasional liberal atrocities committed against militiamen, is past. They ought to actually be rooting this out, getting rid of this DEI, firing the people that were kneeling down in front of rioters in the nation's capital, and take an active stance to try and actually go against those people who for the last 8 years have been attacking political rallies. Go after Antifa. Why can't you arrest people in Antifa? Are they smart? Go find the pipe bomber.
I mean,
where the heck is that person?
It drives me nuts. Like RICO, are you kidding me? Like organized racketeering? Like what is going on when you have an entire complex that supports the burning of the country down? We know exactly what would happen if the shoe was on the other foot. All those organizations and foundations would be investigated as being complicit in violence. I couldn't agree with you more. And you bring up this point about just corruption in general. If you really take the job seriously, and the American people have lost their trust in their institutions, what better way to regain that trust than to trust the Department of Justice, who's going after corruption night and day everywhere at the elite sectors of society where people usually get away with it. That makes a lot of point. You didn't even mention the Epstein list. I mean, I would throw that in there.
Go to the Clinton Foundation. I mean, for goodness sake, it is so unbelievably corrupt.
I mean, it always is. And what are we going to do to actually go through and change it? I don't know. We're going to see what Pam Bondi can come in there and do. Donald Trump, he's on his, huge wave of executive orders right now. It really does seem like times are changing right now. Bedford, what can we look forward to with your Beltway brief tomorrow?
I've got some interesting and fun stuff coming in for you about the deep state's fight to try and tank Donald Trump's nominees. Anyone who threatens to upset the apple cart is in their sights.
All right. Well, we will look forward to that tomorrow. Thanks so much for joining us.
See you then.
What's standing between Trump and the end of the deep state? We'll have some of your answers next.
One of the ways you can slow things down in a bureaucracy is you can commit to studying something. Put together like a commission. Mr. Secretary, we're going to put together a commission to study the safety of fluoride in water. Mr. Secretary, we're going to put together a commission to study vaccine safety. and we'll let you know when the report comes out. And he'll be like, yes, yes, great. And then years will pass and nothing has happened. A sophisticated bureaucrat can do a lot to run around an unsophisticated political appointee.
Well, that's video of James O'Keefe exposing how the deep state delays confirmations. And that's exactly what we're talking about here on the show today. And so we wanted to get your take. So I asked you on X, what's the biggest obstacle facing Trump in his fight against the deep state? And we have a couple answers for you. We have Matt Van Swole first, who is from North Carolina. He's been on the show, actually, a couple times with us. He says, personally, having worked for the federal government as a nuclear scientist, I feel like the biggest obstacles are middle management leadership. Probably won't be talked about a lot, but much of the enforcement of bureaucracy in government is done by managers given usually broad power to say no to people who want to get stuff done. That's the reason that I, and like so many other very smart, driven people, left the government. Middle management.
Yeah, this
is always a problem.
A profound point. It's one of the problems throughout all of America in the post World War II era, is that you have this managerial class that will, they have their position, they stay in their position, they don't want to let anyone get anything done. And he's absolutely right that you have to be able to empower talented people. It's a problem in any business, but it's way more of a problem in the government, where these people can sit there for years and it's very hard to fire them. So this is why it's important that the people on top, right, who can actually fire these middle managers, who are the types who run these games that the clip from O'Keefe was talking about.
And next we have Lawrence Muir. He says it's always leaks. When I was a lawyer in the White House in his first administration, media leaks were used to undermine policy decisions before they were ever made and created in internal turmoil. Maintaining tight discipline to prevent leaks enables them to implement policies. Now, Susie Wiles has done a much better job stopping the leaks in this administration. If you remember back to Trump, every day, even before he would get in office, it was one leak after another. Lawrence has a great point here, but it is getting better this time around.
Yeah, this is an enormously important point because it's something that really bothered me about the last administration. The real threat to national security that we had last time was an unprecedented amount of leaks of the kinds of conversations that were only leaked very rarely in the past. Everyone in the government thought it was okay and they were going to, fight the power, and it was justified for them to do things that really they should have been put in jail for. You're talking about conversations the president is having with foreign leaders. It was unconscionable, it was disgusting, and it was dangerous last time. But I think the difference is this time, a lot of those people who, were stabbing in the back, they're not there anymore, because they weren't running with him this time. So there's a lot less of the snakes around him. And I think everyone knows and is hopefully terrified about what might happen to them this time if they're found out.
Yeah, and I just think of the post that Trump put out, he named so many of the different people that were in the last administration. He's like, none of them are going to be invited back. They are gone this time. They're not welcome in the new administration. One more, we have Brent Crowley. His answer for what is the biggest obstacle facing Trump in his fight against the deep state? His own party, unfortunately. Brent is a man after my own heart. The rhinos are the problem. We always say, look at Congress. There are so many, terrible Democrats, we know that, but there are so many terrible Republicans that are out there. We have a handful of people that you can go through and you can count on to try and push that agenda forward and get things done. The rhinos are the problem.
Yeah, that's right. It's the people who are closest to you who stab you in the back who hurt the most, right? And they get in the way. I would say again here, though, the difference is that those people are on the run, and Trump is the Republican Party, for better or worse. Actually, why am I saying that? It's better.
Better. It's better.
It's just like I left there. I was not done with the Republican Party years ago before Trump. He's rejuvenated it. He's made it something completely different. So these people are actually on the outs. They're clearly part of a uniparty. Everyone recognizes it. That's good. But especially in Congress, it will be difficult. It will be difficult. But that's why we're here, to hold them to account.
That is why we're here. So Professor Peterson, give us your final take for today's episode.
Well, I think it's important as we start this show and we start talking about the national mandate, the will of the people that has been given to Donald Trump to implement, to take care of this federal structure, bureaucracy that's really reshaped the very shape of American government, right? We don't live in the republic of the early American Republic. Unfortunately, we live in a world that's been reshaped by progressivism already, and we need to refound it back. That's the point of the show. That's what we're going to be covering because, frankly, it's opaque. No one can see how this thing works, whether you're in an elite position or a regular person, right? No one knows. We're going to delve into that and delve into this war, this battle for the very soul of American government. But as we do that, I want to constantly remind you that these issues are connected to things that you care about and that you can do something about in your own community. When I was growing up, people would talk about working for local government, being civically engaged, and it all kind of sounded nice, but it seemed sort of boring. You know, it's like, what was important there, really? I mean, as one girl said in my class once, you know, in my town, everything's fine. There's no potholes here. Everything works. There's nothing to worry about. Well, you and I know that now, in today's America, right now, in 2025, that's not the case. So when we look at, say, what Chris Rufo and others are doing in DEI, that applies to your own school in your own region, right? If you're part of the public school system, you have kids there, there's other people in your community that are worried about the same problems, and they are not going to change unless you do something about them. So if you see this spirit of, MAGA, MAHA, etc., there are always ways to apply that to your local community. And if you don't, those places will not get any better. And let me tell you, those local governments, those local services are also corrupt. They've been infected by the same problems. And those problems do not get any better unless people of goodwill band together and donate a little bit of time to do something about it. And I guarantee you there's other people who are thinking the same things, wondering the same thoughts about what's going on. I guarantee you there are systemic structural problems in the way government works in your area. And I guarantee you that also, though, that there is something you can do about it.
When you talk about DEI and schools or businesses that are saying, oh, we're not going to do that anymore, we're going to go away from it because it's now the cool thing to do is to get rid of your DEI program, people still need to be vigilant and they still need to watch because what they are going to try to do is they're going to say, oh, we're getting rid of DEI as it's explicitly labeled, and they're going to come back and label it something else and try and still implement those same policies. So you still have to be watching out for this.
Yeah, a buddy of mine have helped out in a nonprofit called Courage is a Habit is always talking about this because Alvin Liu, Courage is a Habit. You can find him on Twitter. But it's exposing different words for the same thing. Because if you have the wrong staff, personnel as policy, they're just, if they're all about this woke garbage, they're just going to find ways to teach it to your kids no matter what, unless you ultimately find a way to get rid of them and completely change, the structure of the system. So it's absolutely the case that you can't just go on a website and look it up. You really got to do work or find the other people who are doing the work in your community to root it out.
The deep state is going to deep state, and I can't wait to see how they're going to come after Trump and try and stop the JFK files from being released. It's going to be the thing that is on my mind every single day from now until the day that it happens. I really have faith that, RFK Jr. has been so outspoken about this in such brave ways. No one wants to talk about the fact that he's been saying these things about what happened to his own family. And I'm just happy for him that this stuff will be coming out. Yeah, be sure to subscribe to Blaze News, The Mandate, on all your podcast platforms and rate and review the show. And we'll be back to break it all down for you tomorrow night.
Go Bills.